Greetings IB artists. Today we'll be looking at and the comparative study has criteria A to E. Okay, and we're going to be going through these criteria in a minute with the addition of F for the HL students. And as you can see, the weighting of them, they're all kind of weighted quite equally, with the exception of Criterion F, which is double the other criteria, which means that it's very, very important. The connections that you make to your own work and that kind of application of what you have discovered to your own work should be taken very, very seriously by the HL students and elaborated on. Before we start the criteria are marked in different bands. There's a top band where you scored nothing or very, very poorly, and then there's the bottom band, which is the maximum amount of marks that you can get for each criterion. And we're going to be really focusing on that because that should be your aim. But I also want to comment on the fact that what makes a student average and score in the average band versus the student who has scored top marks, the IB uses words like descriptive versus analytical. It is extremely important that you understand the difference between description and analysis. I've talked about this in my video on the extended essay if you're doing one in the visual arts, but of course it applies to all subjects at this level on the IB course. Description is basically when you are telling me what you're looking at or what you're doing in quite a factual manner. The difference between description is basically describing something, telling me what you're doing, telling me what you're looking at, versus analysis where you're not only telling me what you're doing, seeing, etc., but you're going into the why, the when, the how, etc. So you're asking, you're kind of going beyond the facts. You are critically thinking, you are making connections, you are applying strategies, you are being creative. It is literally the next step. So the IB kind of differentiates between the kind of the average band or the competent band and the excellent band by using things like I've already said, descriptive versus an analytical. They're also looking at the difference between descriptive and insightful kind of research. So insight means that you have lots of aha moments, that you have not only learned stuff, but you are beginning to make connections in a creative way. You are beginning to apply things in a creative way. You're beginning to experiment with your knowledge, right? So that's really the difference between an average student or a competent student and a fluent student or an excellent student. So Criterion A, the first criterion, is identification and analysis of the formal qualities of an artwork, object, or artifact. So for the highest band, you are aiming to provide a consistent, insightful, and informed identification and analysis of the formal qualities of the selected piece. Okay, or the pieces actually. So make sure that you understand that insightful is a keyword here, consistent is a keyword here, that your work is consistently insightful and analytical, not just in patches, not just bits and bobs. This is why you shouldn't just be scanning your sketchbook and cramming everything in randomly. You should be selecting or editing what you've done to really make sure that you're hitting those insightful and analytical forms of research and communicating that research. The Criterion B is about analyzing the purpose and the function of the artwork, object, or artifact that you have selected. For Criterion B, if you have not selected a minimum of 3 artworks to compare, which have been done by a minimum of 2 artists, then you cannot score higher than a 2. So be very, very careful. Make sure that you are ticking all the boxes and that you've got enough artworks and that you have made sure that it is done by at least 2 different artists. Make sure that the artists that you pick are from different cultural contexts. This is very, very important. All right? So if you live, I don't know, in Boston, let's say, don't pick 2 artists who both live in Boston. Pick someone who lives, I don't know, in China, and pick someone who lives in Boston or Italy, or you get the idea. But make sure that the cultural context of your artists, your chosen artists, are different. This is actually makes you work much easier because the differences and the contrasts in the cultural context will be a lot more obvious in a way. So it's actually, making your life easier. The top scoring band for Criterion B requires you to provide work or research that is consistent, insightful, and shows informed analysis. Informed means that your research is from reliable sources. It is not random, it's not your opinion, and demonstrates the thorough understanding of the function and purpose of the selected pieces from at least 2 contrasting cultural contexts. So again, the key words here are consistent, insightful, and not informed analysis. So Criterion C is the analysis and evaluation of the cultural significance of your artworks. Again, like in Criterion B, if you have not got the minimum number of artifacts, which is 3, and if you have not got at least 2 different artists, then you automatically cannot get more than a 2 out of 6. So the highest band for this criterion is the research has to be consistently insightful, there is informed analysis, and there is a thorough evaluation of the material, conceptual, and cultural significance of the selected pieces from at least 2 contrasting cultural contexts. So you are looking at the material, conceptual, and the cultural significance of your artifacts. This is definitely a criterion that you have to go into specifics quite deeply. Make sure that you are discussing and analyzing and evaluating the concepts of the artifacts that you have chosen. So what are the ideas behind it? What was the intention behind the artworks? You're closely looking at the material used. Why was this specific material, which is what the artwork is made out of, why was this specific material used? Was it because there is some cultural significance to it? Does the material behave in a certain way that is, that lends itself to what the artist is trying to communicate or do? And then, of course, so the material is, sometimes the material itself can be the concept of the artwork. So make sure that you're not kind of skimming the surface here. Someone like Vic Moniz is using garbage and has a lot of implications sociologically, environmentally, etc. So make sure that if you're talking about material, you really understand the kind of the core areas that the significance of that material covers. The last one is the cultural significance. Again, make sure that you go deeply into all the influences that go into the artwork, that the artwork is either commenting, Possibly the artist is commenting on a specific cultural context. So maybe they're commenting on religion, or maybe they're commenting on gender issues that are unfair, or perhaps they're commenting on certain historical traditions that are inherent in the work, or significant to the work that is produced, right? Most of the time, I mean, a work of art is a complex thing, so most of these, the cultural, the material, and the conceptual, will overlap. So you make sure again that you're going in deep, that you're not just skimming the surface and describing what you see. Make sure that you are looking at the concept behind the work, the material that is being used in the work, and make sure that you understand the cultural influences of the work, and going into them deeply and making connections, and looking at the implications, how the artwork communicates in terms of these three areas. The Criterion D is about making comparisons and connections. Like in Criterion B and C, if the minimum number of artifacts and the minimum number of artists are not covered or not considered, you cannot score more than a 3 in this criterion out of 6. The highest band for this criterion, the work that you are, or the research that you're producing, should critically analyze and discuss the connections, similarities, and differences between the selected pieces. These connections are logical and coherent, and showing a thorough understanding of how the pieces compare and contrast. Okay? So this is basically when the comparison begins to happen. For Criterion A, B, and C, you've been looking at the formal qualities, identifying them and analyzing them. You have been looking at the function and purpose of your artworks and analyzing those. And you've been analyzing the cultural significance of your artworks. And now for Criterion D, you're beginning to compare them. You're looking at the contrasts, you're looking at the similarities. And again, you're going beyond the surface. You're going into each criterion in depth. You're looking at how and why and when and all that stuff. All the influences and the factors that have contributed to those artworks. Criterion E is about presentation and using the subject-specific language. I've talked about this in my video on extended essays. Each subject has specific vocabulary and a specific kind of jargon, if you like, to express ideas. You should be familiar with that. The way to familiarize yourself with that is by reading lots of articles and writing, general writing on art. Art is talked about a lot. Not everybody's good at it, not all artists love it, but unfortunately language is one of the most developed ways that we communicate, and therefore when artwork is about complex emotions and ideas and influences, we have to resort to language in order to express and discuss those. So it is very important that you spend some time developing your vocabulary in order to express yourself clearly, coherently, and logically. And you do this basically by reading. Okay, a lot of people think, well, artists they just talk rubbish and it's just blah blah blah. It kind of really isn't. When we still used to interview IB art students, as an examiner, I would immediately know whether the student was trying to kind of bluff their way out of basically being very superficial about their research and ideas and work in general. And they would kind of try and cover it up by talking a lot. And if it sounds like blah 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 and lots of fluff, it is blah 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 and fluff. The advantage of developing your vocabulary is that you can be very, very precise in the way you express yourself. So make sure that it isn't just waffle, that you're not just waffling on, and that what you say is clear and meaningful and to the point. The highest band for Criterion E, the research should be clearly and coherently conveying information which results in a visually creative and legible study that enhances the impact of the work and the reader's understanding. Subject-specific language is used accurately and appropriately throughout. So that's the maximum kind of band, the highest band that you're kind of aiming for. The key words to watch out for in this top band of Criterion E, things like it results in visually creative and legible study, right? So you're not just kind of covering the basics, you are showing creativity, you're making connections in unexpected ways. That's what creativity is, or one of the things that it is. And this enhances the impact of the work and the reader's understanding. So the creativity really kind of highlights the depth of the research. This is why you should be editing the research in your sketchbook and not just kind of compiling bits and bobs from here and there. And then the subject specific, the subject is art, so you're using very subject specific language which is concise and clear to kind of gain the top marks for this criterion. Now the last criterion, which is for HL students only, is making connections to own art making practice. Now this is where making connections and applying things that you have learned and discovered while doing the research does not mean that your work should be derivative. What does derivative mean? Derivative means that you have applied strategies, methods, processes, concepts, etc. in a very literal way. You have basically learned something, discovered something, seen something, and you have then kind of applied it to your own work. That is when work is derivative. Make sure that you remember creativity is going beyond the literal, right? You are not taking something and simply applying it somewhere else, in this case your own work. You are making connections that are way beyond what is kind of very literal and basic. You are making connections in very unexpected ways. And when you do that, magic happens. So you are taking things, you're learning, you're discovering, and then you're experimenting. And when you experiment, lots of aha moments happen. And you then kind of, you go beyond what you've just learned. You apply it in different ways, in different contexts, etc. So this is very important, especially if you're an HL student. You are expected to go beyond the literal, okay? You are expected to be creative. So the top mark, or the top band of the F criterion, requires the research or the work provides consistent and insightful evaluation on the outcomes of the investigation. So again, keywords: insightful, consistent, evaluation, not just description. The student effectively analyzes and evaluates, again keywords, the extent to which their own art making and pieces have been influenced by artworks, objects and artifacts examined in the comparative study. Okay, again, examined is a key word. Examination is a thorough research of something, making informed and meaningful connections throughout. Informed means that you are well learned in the subject, that you have looked at lots of things, that you've researched it thoroughly. That's what informed means. It is an informed opinion. It is an informed analysis, an informed evaluation. These are based on lots and lots of really good, in-depth research from reliable sources. It goes on to say that the connections are meaningful. Meaningful, not literal. You're not simply taking something and applying it somewhere else. Meaningful means that you are making connections integrated into your own work, so that the concepts are then enriched by your own creativity, by your own art making practice, by your own thoughts, by your own cultural and other contexts and background influences. So again, you are taking these to a higher level. You are basically being an artist. This is, at the higher level, you are embodying the process of being an artist and creating artwork based on research and influences, and then integrated with your own identity and your own specific context. Right, so I'm trying to keep my videos short. I really hope that this has been useful. Make sure that you comment below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to know if you've got any specific questions, whether you've got any specific ideas that you want me to kind of make a video on, etc. I'm very grateful if you like, share, and subscribe to my channel. That way I know that it has been useful. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Miss A, and all the best.